Leave behind the safety of the Humblewood and travel down the Tangrip coast to the Bay of Baluch, home to both the Kingdom of Den and the Serpent Domain. But neither hold the true power of the bay, for that lies in the sea itself and the pirate lords that call her tides their own. The dread pirate Captain Bluebeak, Tiberius Fang, Kin the Bladeless, and Gabrielle LaFleur, the self-proclaimed pirate queen. Each one vying for power over the very tides themselves. But do any of them really have what it takes to hold up the legacy of the briny bulldog? Tune in each week to find out if our little crew has what it takes to stand up to the pirates of the blood-soaked waters. Dark Fortunes is available every Monday on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play. Set sail for high seas adventure.
This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, we are chatting with an amazing writer, actual player, game designer, Jennifer Kretchmer. This is one of my favorite humans on the planet, and so I will dive right into my interview with her because you deserve to know all about the awesome stuff she is doing and her amazing opinions on the worlds of writing and actual play, and it's just a great discussion. Here's my chat with her. Okay, everybody, now I am here with one of my favorite people, one of the most creative people in our tabletop games industry. Jennifer, welcome so much to Tabletop Babble. For people who don't know, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games? And I'll just say, like, the world in general, because you have so many cool creative skills that apply to our conversation.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. I am so happy to be here. I am Jen Kretchmer. I am a player on Beyond Heroes for D&D Beyond. I am a DM. I have been playing D&D for almost 20 years. I've been DMing for about 16 of those years. I executive produced and was in Monsters and Fables. I am a television producer, writer. I am an advocate in terms of disability, accessibility, and inclusiveness in tabletop gaming. And entertainment as well, in front of and behind the camera. I'm an actor. I direct. I don't know what else I do. I do all sorts of things.
Yeah, you do a ton of stuff, which is really amazing. I think you are just a force for good and a force for creativity and awesomeness in the hobby. But I want you to take me. No, thank you. Thank you so much. I want you to take me back, Jen. When did you first lay hands on a tabletop role-playing game? What did you play? How did it all go down?
So the first time I ever encountered D&D, I was about 14, I think, and my brother had started playing D&D at summer camp. We went to a performing arts camp in upstate New York where you had the option to go play D&D during the day, and my brother had gotten into it. He tried to explain it to me, and I didn't quite get it, wasn't into it, didn't really sit down and get to play, so it never really clicked. Fast forward to about 3 years later, and a group of my friends in high school decided that they wanted to get a game going, and I was all about it. I got hooked and have been playing ever since.
Nice. That is a great way to sort of be introduced to the game.
I stole my brother's second edition books.
There you go. So did I.
Nice.
So at what point do you sort of make the transition to this being something that you do and make some money off of?
That sort of was an accidental happenstance. I had been playing for a while, with friends out here, and a number of mutual friends, including Satine Phoenix, knew I played. And one day Satine said to me, "Hey, you should really start being more public about the fact that you play, because there just aren't a lot of female DMs out there." And she was right. And I really took that to heart. And then she was kind enough to have me on GM Tips, and that sort of put me out there more publicly. So once that had happened, I started having more conversations with more people in the hobby, and it just sort of went from there and turned into a bigger piece of my life. I had been involved in advocacy for women in gaming and geeky hobbies for a long time, but I hadn't really dug in terms of being as public as I was about gaming in the same way until Satine really encouraged me to start speaking more openly about it. And then it really just went from there.
You sort of have been on the scene for a while now. You've been in actual plays. You've been giving advice on the internet. You've written some things. What do you think some of your strengths are when it comes to running games in particular? Because I think the first time I saw you run a game was Gamehole Con. And obviously you had been running games long before then, but it was a blast. And so what do you think are some of your strengths when you're running a game?
I think I really try and be flexible with my players. I've had players tell me that something they really appreciate in the games is that I say yes to what they're trying to do, and really let their creativity become the table's creativity. I'll pivot with their out there wild ideas and sort of just run with them. In the whole game, that was the twinkles, the Twinkies from the Feywild that turned you into My Little Pony, which came completely from the players and ended up being the game changer at the end of the campaign. Spoiler alert. But that sort of thing, that to me is where so much of the fun of the game comes from. So I really think that's a strength for me. Also, that I've been playing for so long, I really have developed a breadth of knowledge about the game. Some of that too, I think, comes from whenever you come from a group that is not necessarily the dominant group in a community. Often you do have to do this demonstration of knowledge and skill. And so for me, one of the ways that that's always manifested is showing the depth of my knowledge and experience in terms of how long I've played, how many editions I've played, how many books I've read, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's a thing you probably get questioned about a lot as a woman, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, for years it was I would go into the store to buy minis and I would be asked if I was buying for my boyfriend, or I would paint figurines and, did your friends paint those for you? Or I'd pick up a book, or you're buying for your brother, and I'm going, no, I stole his books. This is my campaign. So there's always sort of, I think, out of habit, and the game is changing now, obviously, in some ways. Though I think women have always been involved, or women have always been involved, back to TSR, but in a more public sphere now. People are talking about it, but it sort of is a reflexive habit to need to demonstrate that sort of, I will overwhelm you with my ability and knowledge and skill just to show you that I belong here. And it's a bad habit, but it's a way that I've always sort of dealt with dodging those conversations of questioning whether or not I belong at the table.
So when you are a player in a game, I have had the privilege of playing with you. Not nearly enough, I should say, just one time, but it was a lot of fun. And like my clearest memory of that game is you describing your centaur character doing this dressage style dance on these like magnificent steps. And it just is one of those gaming memories that sticks in your brain like, this was such an amazing moment. What do you think your strengths are as a player?
Yeah, that was again completely coming out of just sheer desperation in that situation. That was a role play roulette game, so we had no context for our characters, and I was handed a centaur bard, and I did not know how to even approach that. And the only thing I could think was horseshoes, and horseshoes led to tap shoes, and it just went from there. But I think, as a player, I'm a compulsive note taker. My notes are color coded and logged, and it's really ridiculous. But I love being at the table. I love the stories that come out of people working together and collaborating, and trying to help one another achieve goals. Those are things that I think are really, really fantastic. And as a player, that's some of my favorite stuff to experience.
What do you think are some of your favorite role-playing game systems, Jen? You obviously work a ton in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, what with being on Beyond Heroes and things like that. But I also know you run and love other games as well.
I do. I really, really, really love 10 Candles by Stephen Dewey. I think that is one of the more brilliant games that's been put out in recent memory. It is a single session, zero prep game. It encourages narrative freedom for the characters. It has mechanics in there that I've brought into my D&D games, especially for players who I'm trying to get out of a rut. I think there are things you can do with the character creation mechanics that really can break people out of their habits and expectations. And it always has provided, every time I've played it, it provides some of the most narratively and emotionally satisfying conclusions to stories that I've ever experienced in gaming. I really cannot say enough good things about that game. I've become an evangelist for 10 Candles. I can't recommend it highly enough.
I knew 10 Candles was going to come up because you and I have talked about 10 Candles a lot. What I want to know is, what have you brought in from 10 Candles? What have you brought into your D&D games? Because I think that's amazing.
Yeah. So I have brought in the thing of write down something and then hand it to the person next to you. So in 10 Candles, during the character creation, you have a number of index cards, and you write down character traits on the index cards. And so people will start to build their character, and then all of a sudden you're told that you have to pass your cards to other people at the table. So I've swapped that over to D&D to a class and a background. So I'll have players write down a class and a background on 2 separate index cards, and you'll see the gears start working. I only do this for one-shots. I don't do this for longer campaigns. But for one-shots, I'll have them do this, and then I'll make them switch characters. And because there's so much freedom in the subclasses now, you really still can play the kind of character you want to play. But, I've seen players go, how am I supposed to be a sorcerer sailor? That makes no sense, because they've been doing a build in their head. And then all of a sudden they're confronted with these characters that they think there's no way to make functional. And then you watch the light bulbs go off, and all of a sudden you're watching them play a character that's become so interesting. So that has been a fantastic tool. I think 10 Candles also is really great at teaching you how to listen to your players. There's a lot of, you open the door, because in 10 Candles you're fighting for narrative control rather than for a win. So it's, you open the door, and then we're going to roll dice to figure out who's going to get to do the narration of what's behind the door. So trusting that your players can answer those questions without trying to, quote unquote, win the game, that they'll make choices that are going to be narratively interesting for the story. It takes a lot of the pressure off of you as a DM when you can say, hey, where did you get that item? What does it mean to you? Describe that for me. What do you find? Where do you start? I had a campaign start, and this may be too risque. We'll find out. I had a campaign start. I said, where are you starting? And somebody said, an adult toy convention. And so that is how we ended up starting a campaign that we weren't there long, but at the Greater Faerun, please cut this. the Greater Faerun Adult Fantasy Toy Convention, where they met the sweetest grandma wearing leather. She was a halfling. It was fantastic.
Is amazing. That is amazing. It's funny. Some campaigns, it takes a while to get to that place, right? But yours started off there. Where do you go? Where do you go from there when you start there?
Onto the adventure that I had planned, which had nothing to do with any of that. That just happened to be where they got the hook, and that's where the quest giver was.
Sure.
And then, of course, where they finished the campaign. Again, one shot, not full campaign. That was a one shot. We were running Wolves of Welton.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's great to do that. It's great to include players more and give them narrative control of the story. D&D doesn't have a ton of mechanics for other than, right, it's your turn. What does your character do? Giving the character license to sort of create things in the world like that. And I think that is great, to be able to give them the tools to say, this is our world. We're creating this together. How do we make this happen?
Yeah, well, and also as a DM, it's such a great shortcut to making yourself look really good, because your players are going to tell you exactly what they want from the story. They will tell you, I want a spooky story. I want a silly story. I want this, that, and the other thing, when you're giving them that information. So then when you just facilitate that, they look at you and go, you're a genius. And you're going, I just like helped you on the way that you wanted to take this. It's a complete DM hack. And players don't realize that they're doing all of the work for you.
Yeah, I do it. I do it in a more obvious way sometimes. Players' favorite thing is to talk to a side character and then ask that person's name, right? Because they love to torture us. So I will always turn it around and say, "You tell me," right? Like, you tell me what this person's name is, because it is important, and it's clearly important to you. So what do you think? And that's how you end up with a bunch of dwarves named Fartface or whatever in your campaign.
I mean, it's Barry Blue Jeans in the Adventure Zone. That's and in so many ways, that was the formative moment of what that show became. Was the moment that they realized they could go off script and have a character named Barry Blue Jeans. They thought it was a ridiculous joke that turned into, oh no, we have the freedom to tell whatever story we want to tell.
Yeah. No lie, I think about that moment all the time for that exact reason. All the time.
I go to the Adventure Zone for everything. I mean, it's just there's an Adventure Zone moment for anything you need.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that you also work in the TV world. How do you think your TV work informs what you do in role-playing games and vice versa?
I definitely think about chapters for stories. I think about arcs for characters. It's nice to not have to think about budget. But I think that there are tropes that you learn through TV. There are shortcuts you learn when you, even just by watching a lot of TV, that you can pick up on character types, archetypes. I'm a firm believer in the idea that anything you learn outside of a subject will inform your skill in a subject. So I think that, the more stories you're absorbing in any form, the more it will help your D&D game. And that's not limited to fantasy stories. A lot of the work I've done has been in unscripted TV. So understanding why character personalities create conflict is always really interesting, because then you can go look at a character sheet and go, oh, this person has this flaw. That's going to be really interesting if we can make that clash with this other thing. I mean, a lot of what makes stories work is creating conflict. You learn how to do that when you're dealing with any sort of long form storytelling, because you have to keep coming up with ways to do that, whether that's multiple seasons of a TV series or multiple seasons of or multiple arcs of a campaign.
People all the time make that analogy of structuring their campaigns like television shows, right? Like that each tier of play is a season and all that kind of thing. And every session is an episode. I worked in unscripted television as well, and I also have worked in some scripted television. And I think about narrative structure a lot because of those things. Even when you're making something short, right? Even if you're working on a short form thing, there's a narrative structure to it, a 30-second promo or whatever it is that you're making. It really is very fascinating because that allows you then to play D&D for an hour if you need to and still fit in a full story. We played that hour-long game with Satine, and I think there were 8 of us. Were there 8 of us?
Yeah, might have even been 9. There were a lot of us.
Yeah, which is like insane, right? To have an hour-long game with that many people, none of whom had small personalities.
No.
Yeah, so it was it's fascinating. Hey everyone, we're going to take a quick break and then back to the babble.
Hey there, listeners. It's Shane.
And Ishan, your hosts from the Total Party Thrill podcast, the newest addition to the Don't Split the Podcast network.
We talk topics that help you, dear listener, create and play better RPG games.
We have a back catalog of more than 150 weekly episodes.
And we got nominated for an Emmy for episode 11, Social Contracts.
In episode 154, we talked about crossing the moral event horizon. How evil is too evil?
We also recap our home games, like the 40k Rogue Trader campaign, Dynasty Unwarranted.
But that's mainly just you trying to kill us all. In your defense, our characters are greedy idiots.
Don't forget the 3 years we spent in Eberron playing Morning Glory, your 5th edition D&D campaign.
We also review new RPGs and books, and every episode we build a 5th edition D&D character in the Character Creation Forge.
You might check out the Pint-Sized Punisher from episode 119, a halfling with a bad attitude, and 14 levels of Barbarian.
So to recap, Total Party Thrill, RPG advice, campaign recaps, and D&D characters built by your dashing hosts every single week.
What more could you possibly want?
To get back to the actual show?
Oh yeah, let me just hit this button, and here you go.
Let's get back to the babble. When you are working on something that is a project that's narrative, be it television or a role-playing game thing, how do you like to start? What does your process look like?
It depends. A lot of the way my brain works is I come up with, I find something to kind of glom onto, and then I branch off of that. For the Game Hole game, I was thinking about how much it sucks to have to go to the mall, which became the domain of dread, which became, okay, well, what's in there? Okay, well, what would cause that? Okay, well, so if it's moody teenagers, no, I think first it was, so there's got to be a hot topic. Okay, so there's moody teenagers. So what would they have done? Okay, they would have tried to summon Bashaba, but Bashaba would have had none of that and gone, we're going to stick you here for a few thousand years and see what happens. And just, it was one thing bouncing off of another. And that sort of is how that teased out. When I'm doing TV, it's often the same thing, depending on what the project is. The other thing that's become really interesting is that my D&D has started informing my television writing very significantly. I'll work on a project and I'll kind of go, oh, this is sort of like, this setting, or this reminds me of this story or this adventure. And I'll start going, oh, well, what if this works in the adventure? How can I twist that and apply it to this? And, there's this dialogue between the tool sets of narrative storytelling that's developed that didn't used to be there, and it's made me a better writer as well. I think that's a big part of why so many prominent TV writers now and showrunners have been D&D players for so much of their lives. I know John Rogers has talked about it. I know there are a ton of different people who have talked about how D&D has informed their storytelling. Del Toro's talked about how Elric has informed his elves in Hellboy. All of these people have found that the narrative structure and the lessons that come out of how D&D teaches storytelling have informed other forms of storytelling, which is so interesting to me that this has become this whole class of storytellers that we have at the forefront of all of our mass media.
It is really interesting to be at the forefront of D&D becoming entertainment for other people to watch, right? And listen to and consume
It's
in
so weird,
other ways.
right?
Yeah, it's very weird. Years ago, when I started podcasting, I thought, I sort of was making a choice with some friends, and I said, should we do a show where we, sit around and talk about games and what the process of making them and what goes into creation and that sort of thing, or should we do a show where we play D&D? And we all thought nobody wants to listen to anybody play D&D. And wow, were we wrong in like a huge way. And now I am an audience member in these things. I listen to them. It's part of my own entertainment. And something that I also do. What is it like, and where do you see that industry headed? Because it's still very much, in its baby days.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think we are reaching a tipping point in some ways of what the next evolution of that is going to be. For years and years and years, I had been out and pitching a TV show that was essentially an actual play. And for years and years and years, the response was, no one's interested in that. And then all of a sudden, in the last, year and a half or so, that all changed. And when the Critical Role Kickstarter happened, that changed. The interest has shifted in D&D. I get emails from people I met with 4 years ago going, hey, so that D&D thing, what about having that conversation? And the conversation was always like even for the people that seemed a little interested, the first thing they would say is, well, what about having celebrities play D&D? And it was just trying to explain to them that we are so far past that point, that's part of it still, but the actual live play world has evolved to this whole other level of creativity and storytelling. But I think we really are at this point where we're starting to be very oversaturated with the heads in boxes thing. And so watching how people are starting to experiment with what's next is really interesting. And I don't know what it's going to be yet. And also for TV, there's the issue of time, which is that an actual play needs a couple of hours, and a TV show doesn't have that much real estate to give up. Usually it's going to be an hour max. You're going to get 42 minutes to make a show. And so if you can't cram it all in, then it doesn't work. And so that's sort of what we were playing with a little bit with Monsters and Fables, with having this thing that was, very compact and very clean with performers, but still trying to live by the rules and show, introduce new people to the rules as well. But what we discovered in that too is that it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily work as a TV show. It's not necessarily going to be engaging as that. For TV, something is going to need to be different. So it's figuring out what that is. But this dialogue between, having D&D informing these creators and then having those things come back and having a Stranger Things box set, it's this interesting back and forth between these mediums. But it also is really interesting because it's sort of bringing us back to live theater in a lot of ways, which a lot of our generation didn't grow up with. A lot of the people who are playing didn't necessarily have the kind of experience with live theater that our parents or grandparents had with watching people tell a story in real time for your entertainment. it's for their own entertainment too, but for an audience. And when you look at live shows, and even live streaming, that's what's happening. It's a live piece of living storytelling that often is informed by an audience's response. And there's this conversation that's happening between the performers and the audience.
Yeah. I keep talking with people about what has made Critical Role such a success, right? And I think there's this idea that, like, well, they can all do accents, and so that's what it is, right? And it's so much deeper.
That's not what it is.
Than that. Yeah,
yes, it is, but that's not what it is, at least to me.
Yeah, I think it's for one thing that I think is a big factor is they have, and many games have this. I think Beyond Heroes has this too. They have an ideal D&D game in that it happens every week. They play for like 4 hours. They all are extremely open, right? And I think that's like the biggest thing is they all are just so open emotionally and trust each other so much that they're willing to be vulnerable in front of each other, and they're willing to take big acting and emotional risks with each other. And we all want our home games to be that, right? But for obviously when you're getting paid and making money off of it, it makes it easier to make sure everybody is there every week, everybody stays the whole time, that kind of thing. But that openness is so key, I feel like.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think the openness is really important. And I do think part of that is a product of professional actor training. I mean, when you get up and you learn to do scene study, and you're working off of people, and you're learning how to operate in a setting where maybe you're working where you have no one to, your scene partner isn't actually there, which happens a lot in TV. You're reading with one of the scripties who's off camera, and you're looking at a green ping pong ball and having to emote. So you are learning these skills to have that emotional vulnerability. But also, I think the things that to me really made Critical Role work are they were the first. They were the first, at least on any sort of substantial scale. They were actual friends who had real chemistry and had a shorthand with one another, because casting only will get you so far. If there's not some sort of genuine connection, it's not going to work. And I've been part of projects where the show has been cast, and I've been part of projects where people knew each other beforehand, and some things like Beyond Heroes where it was a mix of both. When people know each other first, there's so much more to start with and to build off of. And that, I think, is where the trust does come from, is you really just, you are coming in knowing that someone has your back. But you also just sort of have picked up on their quirks and how they operate, and when they're going to talk, and when to let them talk, and when to cut them off, when to push, and things like that. And then also, Matt has just an extraordinary ability. He has an incredible gift, both as a human being and as a DM. So I think all of those things created this perfect storm to make Critical Role what it is. And I think that so many people have tried to replicate that, but no one has ever had all of those things. So I don't think anyone ever will replicate that. But you look at the other things that have worked, you look at Adventure Zone, and same thing. It's a group of people getting together who have very clear ties to one another, who have each other's back, but know when they can kind of riff on each other and make fun of each other, and can have shorthand, and then can build this amazing story together. That sense of collaboration. So things like that, I think you really are looking at these particular alchemies, and those can't be forced. Those can't be cast. Those can't be manufactured. It's coming out of something genuine.
So What do you think? What are sort of your hopes for the future of RPGs in general? Actual play, writing, whatever it may be. What are your hopes? How do you hope the industry grows?
I mean, my first hope is that we get more accessible games and more inclusive games. I would love to see more representation from many communities, but especially the disabled community, because that is such an incredibly underrepresented group. And to me, I look at fantasy and I go, oh, when your town is getting attacked by monsters every week, you're going to have a much higher rate of disability, not a lower one. And, magical healing is very expensive. So that I think characters in game and also disabled designers are a place where we can do better. I think we can have a lot more representation there. And also the same with communities of color, queer communities. I want to see this game. I really think that what's really amazing about tabletop gaming is I firmly believe that there is a table for everyone and there is a gaming group for everyone. So creating those spaces and having people helping create those spaces where they don't exist is really important. So that's the first thing I really would like to see in gaming. I think we're due for a shift. I'm not sure what it will look like, but I think there is, between streaming and virtual tabletops, I think we are going to see more changes in how the game is played and how people interact with one another. But at the same time, I think that there's something really, really special about getting together in a room with friends and putting down devices or, just focusing on the other human beings in the room and playing a game together and just being present in the same place. There's not a substitute for that. Having the ability to play with friends who are in other states or countries or places is remarkable, and in terms of access, that's huge. But there really is there is something special about being around the same table and in the same physical space with other people. So I'm curious to see what's next.
Yeah, I am very curious to see what's next as well. I think all of your pushes are good ones, and I would like to see those come to fruition. And I think you are going to help bring about those changes. There is no doubt in my mind that when those changes happen, you will be leading the charge. So I feel like we have just only scratched the surface, Jen, but we're already out of time. But for people who want to find you on the internet, where should they go and what should they do?
Yeah, on Twitter, I am at DreamWisp, DreamWisp. And on Twitch, I am DreamWisp Jen. I stream my prep, and we talk about games, and we troubleshoot home games, all sorts of fun things. Those are the best places to find me. I'm on Instagram as DreamWisp as well, but I'm on Twitter much more.
Yes, absolutely. People should follow you there. Check out all the cool stuff that you are doing. And thank you so much for joining me today on Tabletop Babble.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was a great interview with Jennifer. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening. And hey, if you are a member of our Patreon at patreon.com/Intricasso, thank you so much for giving. You really make this show possible. It is huge, the work that you are doing to send the dollars our way. So I really, really appreciate that you're spending some hard-earned bucks on this show. If you think this show is worth at least $1 a month and you can spare the cash right now, head on over to patreon.com/Intricasso. Check out all the awesome rewards. But the biggest reward is that this podcast comes to your ears. And hey, maybe you don't have the cash, or you're already supporting, or you just want another way to support the show. You can do that by leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts right now on your podcatcher, you can just open up the app and pop on over to give us 5 stars. It's that easy. And hey, if you leave us a review with that rating, I will read it out loud and you can make me say anything you want. What a deal. What a deal. So go check it out. Apple Podcasts, Tabletop Babble. Tell your friends. I also want to tell you about another show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. The Fairest of the Seasons is a show you should definitely check out. It is a Jane Austen actual play. Good Society, which is the Jane Austen role-playing game, is what this amazing cast is using. It is just a really fun, amazing actual play. It's very different from what we're used to, right? Not a lot of killing of monsters, but man, is it good and entertaining. It's a nice breath of fresh air. The cast and the game master really, really have a good appreciation for Jane Austen. It's awesome. So go check it out. It's over at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at James Introcaso. That's at JamesIntrocaso. And you can follow my blog, worldbuilderblog.com, for all the game design stuff I'm doing. Tabletop Babble is edited by Nate Pausenga. It's a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget, RPGs are like sex. If you're having fun, you're doing it right. Hey everybody, I just wanted to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Kobold Press's Empire of Ghouls, The Underworld Player's Guide, and Underworld Lairs. Empire of the Ghouls is an Underdark campaign for levels 1 to 13. The matching Underworld Player's Guide includes new playable races from Darrow to Dark Trollkin to Drow and Mushroom Folk, plus new spells, subclasses, and backgrounds. The Underworld Lairs book includes standalone Underdark adventures for levels 3 to 14. So, even if you are not playing Empire of the Ghouls, which you definitely should, you could probably plug this into some other Underdark themed campaigns, like, I don't know, maybe Out of the Abyss. The whole package is now available from koboldpress.com and on Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds for online play. Heck yes, thank you, Kobold Press. Find out more at koboldpress.com and tell them DSPN sent you.